In this lesson, we're going to learn about the properties of algebra. So let's go ahead and take a look at the properties of algebra. The first property we're going to look at is the commutative property. And we're going to be looking at the properties of addition and multiplication. The commutative property says that A plus B is going to be equal to B plus A. For example, you could have 4 plus 3, and that's going to be equal to 3 plus 4. It does not matter which order you add these in. 4 plus 3 is 7, and 3 plus 4 is also 7. And then the same goes for multiplication. You can have A times B, and that's going to be equal to B times A. So for example, you could have 4 times 3, and that's going to be equal to 3 times 4, because 4 times 3 is 12 and 3 times 4 is 12. Now, in order to remember the commutative property, I always remember that it has to do with the order. We commute from one place to the other, and so I think about that as, well, you're changing the order in which you're at. You're commuting to one spot to another. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the associative property. The associative property says that A plus, now in parentheses, B plus C can be equal to, in parentheses, A plus B plus C. So what we're doing here is we are regrouping it. And so for example, I could have 3 plus 4 plus 5 in parentheses could equal to, in parentheses, 3 plus 4 plus 5. So for example, I would do 4 plus 5 is equal to 9, and 9 plus 3 is equal to 12. Or I could do 3 plus 4, and I get 12. 3 plus 4 is 7, and then 7 plus 5, I would get 12 as well. The same thing goes for our multiplication. You can then have A times B times C is equal to A times B times C. So let's go ahead and put the numbers in. So I could have 3 times 4 times 5 is equal to 3 times 4 now times 5. So for example, I could take then 4 times 5 is 20, and then 20 times 3 gives us 60. Or I could have 3 times 4 is 12, and 12 times 5 is 60 as well. And now how I remember this is I always think about this as we associate ourselves with a group. So it's the grouping. All right, then the identity property. The identity property means that if you add a number to a number and you stay itself, so for example, A plus 0 is going to be A. Or we could have, let's say, 5 plus 0 is going to be equal to 5. I like to think about this one as I keep my identity. So what would we do to keep our identity and multiply ourselves by something? Well, I could have A times 1 is equal to A, or if we put a number in there, 5 times 1 is equal to 5. And now we have these on the bottom where it says additive identity and the multiplicative identity, and you're going to hear that every once in a while. Well, the additive identity is 0, and the multiplicative identity is going to be 1. So what I like to think about here to remember what the identity property is we want to keep your identity. So for example, if I'm the number 5 and I want to stay the number 5, well, or keep that identity, I add the 0. Or if I'm the number 5 and I want to keep my identity or be the stay the number 5, I'm going to multiply by 1. All right, the inverse property is going to be what is going to undo something. So for example, if you are going to be then adding something, so A plus negative A is going to be equal to 0. We're going back to that additive identity of 0. So for example, 5 plus negative 5 is equal to 0. Now for the inverse property, we're going back to the multiplicative identity right here as 1. So if I had a times 1 all over a, I'm going to have 1. And let's show it with the numbers. 5 times 1 all over 5 is going to be, because 1/5 of 5 is equal to 1. And so let's think about this as we're going to undo an operation. All right. Now you might have learned about the distributive property last year. And the distributive property says that if you have A times B plus C, that's going to be equal to, remember, you're going to hand these out. So I would have A times B plus, then you're going to take A times C, A times C. All right, so for example, if I had 3 times 4 plus 5, that's going to be equal to then, and I could then multiply these . All right, so let's identify the addition property that's being illustrated. We have negative 15 plus 0 is equal to negative 15. Well, in this case, we added that additive identity, and we stayed the negative 15. When we added the 0, we stayed the negative 15. So this is going to be the identity. And I'm just going to put a plus next to it, meaning the identity property of addition is how we would say that. Now our next one, for number 2, we have 9 plus negative x is equal to negative x plus 9. So notice how these two have switched. The order has switched. I have, instead of having 9 first, I have x first for over here, negative x plus 9. And remember, when you're switching the order, that is the commutative property. So this right here is going to be the commutative property, and we don't have to write it all out, of addition here. All right, for number 3, we have 5.1 plus negative 5.1. Now notice how they canceled each other out. We went back down to that additive identity. We canceled each other out, and we're now at 0. Remember that is the inverse property here. So inverse, and then again of addition. So it's the inverse property of addition. Now we have 12 plus negative 17 is equal to negative 17 plus 12. All right, again, notice how these two have been switched. Don't get confused here. This has got a parentheses here, but it has nothing to do with the grouping of it. So it's just keeping those apart. So all we've done is we've switched our order. So this is going to be the commutative property of addition. Number 5, we have 3 plus negative 2 in parentheses plus 1 is equal to 3 plus negative 2 plus 1. And so in this case, we have the grouping. So this is a parentheses, and then this is a parentheses. The order of the numbers have remained the same, but we have grouped it differently. So this one's going to be the associative property, and of addition. And then our last one here, I have negative x plus x is equal to 0. Again, this one, notice how I've canceled it out. Negative x and x went down to 0. And remember that is going to be, when you undo something, this is going to be the inverse property of addition. All right, so now let's take a look at the multiplication properties. So for number 1, we have x times 5 is equal to 5 times x. And notice how the order has been switched. And remember that the order has to do with the commutative property. And we have the commutative property then of multiplication this time. So And let's just put a multiplication symbol right there to show that. Now for number 2, I have a times b times c in parentheses, and then I have the ab in parentheses times c. All right, for number 2, I have a times b times c, and then I have a times b times c. And notice how I have all of these are in the same order, but I have grouped them differently. So I have b times c and then times a, and then I have ab, and then I'm going to times that times c. And remember that the grouping had to do with the associative property. So this I'm going to put down, and then it's the associative property of multiplication. All right, number 3, I have -5 times 1 is equal to -5. Notice how I've multiplied this by that multiplicative identity. Because I'm the -5 and I want to remain the -5. So I'm going to multiply myself by 1. And then I can keep my identity. And remember, that's called the identity property. And that's of multiplication. Now for number 4, I have -3 times x times 2 is equal to -3 times x times 2. And now notice how all of these are in the same order, but what I've done is I have regrouped it. And remember, when you regroup, the grouping part, this is the associative property of multiplication. Number 5, I have -2 times 4 is equal to 4 times -2. Now, notice what I've done is I've just flipped the order of them. I've switched it. And again, the switching of the order is the commutative property. And that's going to be of multiplication. Number 6, we have 3 times x minus 4 is equal to 3x minus 12. Now don't get this confused with the associative property. A lot of people do that because they see those parentheses. But this 3 next to the parentheses here, it means that I'm going to multiply these, and I'm going to take 3 times x, and I got my 3x. And I took 3 times -4, and I got that -12. Remember, when we do that, we are applying the distributive property. All right, number 7, we have 3/4 times 4 all over 3 is equal to 1. And now notice right here, again, this is that multiplicative identity. I've undone something. So let's take a look at this. The reciprocal of 3 all over 4, or the flip, is 4 all over 3. And when I multiply them, these become a 1, and I cross simplify, and these become a 1, giving me 1 as an answer. Remember, when I do that, I've done this property right here, the inverse property of multiplication. And I have the same thing for number 8. I have 16 times 1 all over 16. So take a look at this. I have 16. I can put that all over 1 because that does not change the order, times 1 all over 16. Now, when I cross simplify this, I get 1, giving me, then I have applied the inverse property of multiplication here as well. All right, and our last one for number 9, I have a times b plus c is equal to ab plus ac. And again here, we have distributed. I have a, b, and then I'm going to take a times c, and I'll have a, c. And here again, what I've just applied is that distributive property. All right, so in this lesson, we took a look at how to apply the properties of algebra.